Hi, it's Mike with the Portage County Safety Council. I'm here with our friend Nick Koya from the Ohio BWC. Welcome, Nick.
Hey, Mike, how are you doing today?
Good. We're also here with Mary Kate Waggoner from Human Trafficking Collaboration in Summit County. Welcome, Mary Kate.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Mary Kate, before we get started on Human Trafficking 101, tell us, what do you do and what do you do at the collaboration there in Summit County?
Yeah, I'd be happy to tell you. So I am part of the Summit County Collaborative Against Human Trafficking. I lead our education and outreach committee. So the collaborative as a whole is made up of a bunch of different agencies in Summit County that provide direct services to survivors of human trafficking. So I actually work for, my day job is to coordinate the Summit County Human Trafficking Task Force. But we are made up of law enforcement, all kinds of victim service agencies, anything you can think of that might provide direct services to survivors. So our education and outreach committee that I co-lead with my partner, Megan, we spend a lot of time doing presentations, interviews, anything like this that spreads the word about what trafficking is and how community members can get involved in stopping it.
Now, Mary Kate, there's a lot of people out there, they see this thing, is Hollywood, and they see it in the movies. They see it even in cities like Toledo. But is human trafficking a local problem here in the Summit County, Portage County area?
It absolutely is. And I say that not just as a person who directly works with survivors on a daily basis, but it's very clear in the numbers and the data that we see from all of our direct service providers that it's a very real problem that's happening in our backyards.
And what are the stats on it? What does it look like locally?
So as the Summit County Collaborative Against Human Trafficking, we actually just wrapped up our 2020 data report. So from our fiscal year, October 2019 to September 2020 is when we were gathering data for. And we gathered from a number of different agencies. And even during COVID, where there's limited services, the identified number of victims that we saw was over 1,500.
Wow. That's just Summit County.
That's just Summit County, and that's actually just what's identified too. Human trafficking is extremely hard to identify in a lot of situations, even if you're trained as a direct service provider. So keep in mind that those are just the numbers we know about.
Wow. 1,500 in Summit County.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nick, what do you think about that? That's mind-blowing. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, that's really a staggering number that I'm just walking into this blindly, didn't hear the pre-talk about this, and just hearing those numbers is really shocking. I wouldn't expect that high. I can see it happening in the area. I know we're on 76 and it seems to be a main thoroughfare for some trafficking, but to hear that's really eye-opening. And I'm interested to hear what you have to say about what's actually happening out there in Summit County, our partners right across the border from Portage. And what we can do to start being involved in this process.
And we do have a handful of members in Summit County. So this is definitely relevant to our safety council. And I was expecting maybe 10, 20, 30, maybe 100 or 200, 1,500. So what is going on? What does it look like locally in Summit County in our area? What does human trafficking look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the big question that everyone wants to know is what does it look like and how can I help stop it? So demographics wise, we kept track of whether it's sex or labor trafficking, the gender and the age category, and we honestly had a decent mix of both. There was a significant amount of sex trafficking that we saw. We did see some labor trafficking survivors as well, even though that number is a bit smaller because those cases are harder to identify because while prostitution is illegal, labor is legal. And so it's harder for those cases to get prosecuted and identified as trafficking cases. Across gender, we mostly saw females, a small number of male or non-binary folks as well. And age category, we saw a decent mix of adults and minors. So that's what the demographics for Summit County look like this year.
So we're going to break down.
When we talk about,
go ahead, Nick.
When we talk about age ranges, just out of curiosity, you said children and adults. I mean, are we talking people in the 1920s as adults, or are we talking this trafficking go all the way up into the 50s, 60s?
Oh, we definitely see a huge age range of survivors. I mean, as young as 12 all the way up to I've talked with survivors that are in their 50s, 60s and up. So
Wow.
I wouldn't say that in Summit County there's like a specific age range that we mostly see. It really is a mixed bag.
Wow.
And that's really different than what, most people would perceive, especially with we'll call it the Hollywood spin, right? How the media spins things, or just social media itself. You always, when I hear trafficking, I'm thinking young females in that, 15 to 19 year range, but we're hearing all the way as young as 12 up into the 60s. And that really changes the perspective on things.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of myths that go around because of the image portrayed in the media and the things we see on social media as well.
That's perfect segue, Nick. So here we go. So just to make this a little more exciting, this is the first Safety Council podcast ever right here. And we're going to play a little game. Mary Kate is going to take some common human trafficking myths, and we're going to decide, Nick and I are going to be the contestants. We're going to determine if they're true or false. And she's going to tell us how clueless we are about human trafficking, or how ready we are. So
No
Mary
judgment.
Kay, give us the first true or false.
Okay, so true or false, human trafficking is always a violent crime.
False.
False. I know the answer to this one. I didn't want to give it away to Nick, though.
Yeah, you did good. A+ on that one. It is false. So a lot of the time, I think when people think of human trafficking, they envision somebody restrained in a basement or kidnapped and thrown in the back of a vehicle, right? That's what we see in the media. It's the glamorized Hollywood version of trafficking. And while that can happen and does happen, most of the time, human trafficking involves some kind of psychological means of manipulation or violence. So threatening victims into providing some kind of commercial sex or exploiting them for some kind of labor. That's the more common version that we see.
I guess there's a documentary or movie about this that someone told me one time, that there's actually human trafficking through like magazine sales. And I remember hearing that people would go on monster.com and different things, and they would see travel the nation, having fun and party.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think it's this great marketing job, and you go and it's actually magazine sales where you're getting a van, and there's a convoy, 2 or 3 vans, and they go city to city, live out of hotels. And that can become, it can become violent, but it's extraordinary, exploitive, and the people are exploited to the extent where if you don't do what they tell you, they'll leave you in the city, and people will go off and get dropped off in cities, and they have no resources, and that's a huge one, because that's something I would never think of. Like you said, I'm thinking of, the kids found in a trailer back in some kind of, Deliverance type movie lot way back in the woods, what I'm saying, bound up, it's no laughing matter, but I'm just saying that's what we're thinking about, but we don't think about job opportunities coming out. So that's good. What's the next myth though? What's the next true or false?
Sure. Okay. So next myth is that human trafficking, or next myth or fact, you guys have to decide, is human trafficking always involves moving, traveling, or transporting a person in some way?
False.
I'll say true.
It is actually false. So Mike takes the win on this one.
I'm winning 2-1.
Yeah, right. So human trafficking is something that's often confused with other crimes like human smuggling, which is just an illegal border crossing of some kind. But human trafficking doesn't actually require any movement at all. So we see survivors trafficked from their own homes, from their school, from their own town. Social media is a really big one. With the popularity of social media, especially right now in COVID times when everyone's online, the trafficker doesn't even have to ever meet the person that they're exploiting in order for it to be trafficking. So we're really seeing this whole new world with the internet right now and trafficking.
With that being said, aren't there like websites? I've heard about these websites that people go to and they facilitate human trafficking. And I know there's a lot of conspiracy stuff out there, and I don't want to get into that, but I mean, like, there's websites and different things that you could go on, like, and kind of a front, like you're buying a car, but it's really a kid or something like that. I don't know anything about it, but just things I've heard. Is that true?
Yeah, there's definitely some truth to that. There's multiple platforms that are popular for people to use to either pose as a false job opportunity. For example, saying, come work for me, I'll provide shelter, food, your basic needs in exchange for this job. That's a really common one. But also people are using things like Craigslist, Backpage. Backpage has been taken up and down a lot. I don't actually currently know if they're still up. There's other websites like Skip the Games, adult websites people use all the time to post about it's just like adult meetup services, but it's really human trafficking. So that's actually really, really common, is using those websites.
Right. And that job opportunity, you just can't get rid of it. I know this missionary couple came to our church like 4 or 5 years ago, and they're from Honduras, and I think they live out in the Nashville area now, but they, her name was Erica Vargas, and she told us a story about how she went to Mexico for like a job opportunity, and that she was raised in a rough home, and she traveled across the country, literally across the, and out of Central America, and went up to Mexico and for a job. When she went there, they had 20 to 30 ladies that were dressed up in interviews and suits and everything, hoping to like find a better life. And they corralled them in a room and took them off. And they literally went through, they were drugged and went through the addiction process, abused and raped. And it was such a horrifying, there wasn't a dry eye in the place. It was just a horrifying thing. And just taking advantage of someone's hope and dreams. So that's a huge setup. So I think as much information we get out about that to help warn people is a good idea. So what's the next myth? Is there another one?
Yeah, I do have another one for you guys. So here's whether the myth or the fact. So if someone consents to an initial situation, but is later exploited, it is not considered human trafficking.
I'd say that's false.
Definitely false.
Yes, you guys are correct. Good job. We got A students here today.
I'm still up by 1 though. Just to throw that out there, Nick. No, we're not competing, but if we were, I'd be winning.
Right.
We'll get you a little trophy for yourself.
Okay.
With that one, when we talk about consent, we want to remember that consent is always something that can be retracted at any time, and consent must be obtained for each part of whatever activity it is, right? Not just talking about sexual things, like talking about job opportunities. So if you consent to an initial job offer and it turns out to be something that it's not, that person is still a victim of trafficking in that situation. They can still definitely be exploited without their consent. So
is there another myth?
Yes, we can do one more myth to see maybe we can end in a tie here.
That's right. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
So myth or fact, traffickers most often target victims that they don't know.
I'd say that's fact.
I know for sure it is false, because it's the same with kidnapping and molestation probably. So I'm assuming it's got to be false. It's probably more likely for people you know. And I saw the last Rambo, and it was a family that got her held captive. If you know what I'm talking about. I can't even remember the name of it, but the new Rambo, this happened.
Yeah. So Mike actually is the winner. It is
by 2.
A myth.
By 2.
So you're right. It is very similar to like a grooming process with like child abuse or anything like that. Traffickers are most likely to target people that they do know, that they have some kind of relationship and trust built with.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. So,
wow.
And
yeah, I would have assumed that it's people that you don't know, that you don't have a close relationship with. So once again, another eye-opening fact. And
I do want to put the disclaimer out there. We're having fun with the game just to make it more entertaining when we're hearing it. But this is really serious information. And I just want everyone out there listening or watching, we're not making light of this. I went through some things myself in my childhood that I won't get into because I don't want to make this about me. But this is part of my passion of why I'm passionate about this. So we're having fun just to kind of be loose and learn about this in a fun environment. But this is not us mocking in any way the victims of this, because it's a serious thing. This is why I'm passionate about getting this before our safety council members and the audience out there. So Mary Kate, thank you so much. Now I want to just look deeper into this because not to make fun of Nick or anything, but I'm sure the average person would have missed maybe all of those. That's why you have them. You only missed 2, so you did good, Nick. I mean, I did a little better, but you did good. But in all seriousness, most people probably would have no idea, and that's why you guys do this training. And so let's break down human trafficking a little bit further. What exactly is it?
Sure. So whenever someone asks me what trafficking is, I always just like to use this really basic definition. I did steal it from an organization called Freedom Network USA, so shout out to them. But human trafficking is, in its most basic terms, forcing someone to do some type of labor or service. So when we talk about trafficking, it's really this umbrella term, and broken down, it's a lot more specific. So generally there's 2 types of trafficking: sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And they definitely are both very prevalent. I will say sex trafficking tends to get a lot more attention in the media. It's very easily glamorized by Hollywood. Labor trafficking isn't as like hot topic right now, but it is definitely just as severe, if not more. Not in like the type of abuse, but just in numbers. So they're very similar in the aspects of there's force, there's fraud, there's manipulation, but the venues in which they occur can definitely differ.
Now, what does that look like too, practically speaking? So we're looking probably a lot of farms. You mentioned before, restaurants, construction. What are we looking at industry wise? Because we have safety council members in all those categories. We have farms, we have construction companies, restaurants. These are real important things for them to kind of focus. Hey, maybe I didn't think about this so much, but maybe it's an issue.
Absolutely. So I always tell people that labor trafficking can occur anywhere where there's labor. So it's always something to be mindful of, especially if you're an employer or anything in that realm, you're a subcontractor or anything like that. So Polaris, which runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline, they identified some of the top venues where they see labor trafficking happening. The number 1 is domestic work, so like nannying, house cleaning, janitorial positions. That is a very easy field to exploit because as far as I know, there's no federal regulations about what labor looks like in domestic work. So
with typically when we look at that a little bit deeper, do the employers actually know they're being trafficked in most cases, or is it like a third party trafficking them and hey, maybe I need a nanny, or I need someone to come and clean up this, or I need a farm help, and I just looking for a labor service. Is it usually a third party doing it, or is the business owner usually aware of it?
Yeah, so it really varies from case to case. I've definitely seen both. So I'm thinking of one case in particular in Marion County. It was a very big case, went all the way to the federal Supreme Court.
Wow.
It was Trillium Farms. It was an egg farm. They had signed a contract with someone to bring in immigrants, refugees, asylees to help for them to have help on their farm. So in that situation, there was a third party. I don't think that Trillium Farms itself ended up getting in trouble at all because I don't think they were aware that those people were being exploited. But what ended up happening is that third party also provided accommodations, food, for those trafficking victims, and it was like a trailer with no AC or heat. They weren't getting fed properly. They were being threatened.
Wow.
Their money was being taken. So that can definitely happen with the third party, but it's also very possible that the employer is directly exploiting someone. And usually what we see in those situations are people that are not familiar with the labor laws. What is fair? What's a fair wage? So a lot of foreign nationals are very vulnerable to labor trafficking because they may not be familiar with what's normal in the US versus somewhere else.
Right. You may see that in some kind of restaurants and different things like that may be forced to work long hours and different things for the room and board. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Nick, did you have any questions on that?
No, I mean, that's kind of eye-opening. If I was to guess, I would think it was more of a third-party piece where it wasn't really the employer. Are we finding that the employers are being approached or engaged by a third party to make these connections, or are the employers just kind of going out on their own and saying, hey, I'm going to do this myself? What do we see with those types of cases?
Yeah, so it really, it depends. I honestly don't have a clean answer either way. I always say, like, I work in the world of gray areas. Like, it really,
Right.
there's
Yeah.
no clean answer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's just, it could go either way. I think it can happen in established businesses, but it can also be happening underground or in like subcontracting situations. So it really is all across the board. I don't have an answer as to like what's more common than another.
And it's just, I think it gives us a different perspective of looking at it, because oftentimes, once again, I think as the lay person walking into this, I would picture it more of an underground operation where, hey, I'm going to supply you with X amount of people in exchange for whatever. But it sounds like even just, Johnny, who owns a business, may be doing this himself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, human trafficking is a profitable business. It really is. It's booming. It's like, I think it's a $5 billion a year industry globally. So there's definitely, it can be a temptation for someone to exploit somebody else because it saves them a heck of a lot of money and they essentially get free labor.
Right.
It is labor. I mean, the labor part of this, is it difficult to discover? Like, how do you guys find out who's a victim? Is there like a hotline they call? Is it a tip from another employee, a competitor of the business? How do they usually find out?
Yeah, so labor trafficking in general, I will say in the legal process, it can be harder to prosecute because, like I said, labor is legal. And so it's easier to defend in court, whereas someone that's being sexually exploited, it's much easier to be like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. Let's prosecute this person. Right. So I would say a lot of it comes down to education of employers and employees. Know your rights, know what's legal, know what's ethical. Make sure that you're sitting down with your team and walking through this kind of stuff, making them aware of grievance procedures, what options that they have, like make sure they know that they are not like that they can identify it themselves. So I think a lot of it comes down to like the grassroots people that are actually just working in various fields, knowing what that looks like. And then as far as like from the task force perspective, we in Summit County do have a task force hotline. So if there's an employer or an employee that feels like they want to make a report about a suspected case of trafficking, they can absolutely utilize that hotline, and detectives will then investigate the situation to gauge whether or not trafficking is actually happening.
I remember, I don't remember, years ago if it was a food service place that I worked at, franchise kind of thing. But I remember working in one place and one of the managers thought one of the new employees was being trafficked. Is that something you hear a lot about? I mean, I really want to get into that part of it. I will get more into sex trafficking here in a minute, but how do we, is that a common thing where they're coming off and working, but then there's something going on and, are there, because I've heard like certain markings like tattoos. What are things employers could look for if they're a legit employer and maybe they get a new employee, but something seems, not right with the people the person's associating with, or just, absenteeism, and just something seems a little off, but instead of just saying,
asking, yeah, I think what we're looking for is the indicators. What, if I'm a business owner or I'm a manager working for a company, what are some indicators that I could be looking for today that might give me an inclination that something isn't right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is what we're doing right now is a great first step. I always tell people to educate yourself first on sex and labor trafficking, because a lot of those red flags, you're gonna start to recognize those things the more you understand what trafficking actually looks like in reality. So that's the number one thing. And then as far as red flags go, there's a huge spectrum of what that could look like. But I would say if you notice that maybe someone is like showing any kinds of sign of abuse. So maybe they're particularly like submissive, afraid, or nervous, especially with authority figures. That's generally a sign that something is off, whether or not it's trafficking. I would know also some populations that are particularly vulnerable to trafficking, and just keep an eye out for anything like that. So like we talked about our immigrant, refugee, or asylee friends, they're very vulnerable to trafficking. The LGBTQ plus population is very vulnerable to trafficking. And you may or may not know that about an employee, but it's also something to keep an eye out for. I would say anything that seems out of the ordinary. So particularly fearful of like law enforcement or authority figures. Maybe they have really expensive clothing and jewelry that doesn't really fit their story, especially like maybe if they work in like a minimum wage job, and they're driving a very expensive vehicle, something that's kind of just off. And I would say if you're starting to notice some of those red flags and you have like a strange gut feeling about it, I don't think it's inappropriate at all as an employer to sit down with that person. Don't ever directly confront them and be like, are you being trafficked? But there's some helpful questions I can share with you guys that I would highly recommend utilizing as an employer.
Yeah, what are those questions? I think that's a great tool.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is oftentimes even people that are being trafficked, they know something bad is happening to them, but they're most likely not going to say, yeah, I'm a victim of trafficking. Thank you for asking me. There's a really good chance that they may not respond well to these situations. So I always tell people, be very mindful of your nonverbals and your tone. Make it a conversational thing, not a confrontation. If someone discloses something to you, trafficking or not, the number one best thing you can say is just, I believe you. Thank you for telling me that. I'm going to keep this safe. And then if they are an adult, asking them what they would like to do, or if they want to do anything at all. So calling the police, connecting them with the victim service agency, going to the hospital, whatever that might look like for them. So as far as those questions go, some helpful ones are, do you ever feel pressured to do something you don't want to do or feel uncomfortable doing? That's a really vague one. You could get multiple answers to that. But if someone's being trafficked, they might say, well, yeah, my dad wants me to do these things and I don't really feel safe at home, or something along those lines.
Now, do victims, I want to just jump in here real quick. Do victims realize they're being trafficked? Is it obvious to them, or is it like this, like we see in domestic violence, many cases, there's this, I feel safe around the dysfunction, even though it's bad for me kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Where it's like,
yeah,
maybe they're emotionally involved and it's real difficult for them to emotionally separate, even though they're going through that. Is there some kind of emotional ties we see there? Is it, so, a lot of people, because I can imagine coming up to think, well, I'm not being trafficked, but they actually are. Do we see that at all?
Oh, absolutely. I would say 99.9% of the time, people will not say that they will not identify themselves as a victim of trafficking. And even if they do, even if they are farther along in the healing process, they have a hard time grappling with, like, most people just don't know what trafficking is. They might think that they were abused or in a domestic violence situation, which may be true, but they don't also realize that there could be those elements of exploitation a lot of the time. So what that usually looks like then is, yeah, you're absolutely right. They could have a very intimate connection with their trafficker. And we refer to that as a trauma bond. And so that's what keeps a lot of people in those situations. They have those mixed elements of fear and love for their trafficker. And it's very common for a trafficker to be a family member or a boyfriend or girlfriend. So again, it makes that situation so much more complicated emotionally and on a physiological level even.
Yeah, I asked that question because I think it reinforces the importance of these questions because like I said, my experience of going through childhood trauma like that was, there's so much manipulation that it's really difficult for that person to go through and kind of express what others may be seeing from the outside. And so just coming off, like you said in the beginning, and saying, hey, are you being trafficked? They're legitimately and innocently going to be like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. So, You know, so
Absolutely.
these questions are great. So other than the pressure question, what else could we ask to kind of
Sure.
lead that conversation in?
So if you want to get more specific with the pressure question, you could even go into, have you ever felt pressure to do something physically or sexually that you didn't feel comfortable doing? So if the conversation kind of steers that way, that's a good question to help them expand on that. Also being mindful that these folks are often really traumatized. So just asking, is there anything that could help you feel safer while we have this conversation? Just being mindful of that. You could ask if you're suspecting some kind of labor exploitation. You could say, you know, what were your expectations of what would happen if you left this person or situation if you didn't do what they told you to do? That's a really good one. Can you leave your job or your workplace if you want to? Yeah, there's a handful more questions. I'd be happy to pass those on for you to distribute as well, but those are ones we recommend. And I always say as well, mirroring the language of the person you're talking to is extremely important. So if someone is calling someone their boyfriend, certainly don't call them their pimp. It's not going to go well. So that's
I didn't even think
just a
about
good rule
that.
of
That
thumb.
could be a code word. You don't even. I wouldn't have never thought about that. That's
Yeah, so
interesting.
that's generally a good rule of thumb, and using language like trafficking is generally very off-putting. They're going to be like, what the heck are you talking about? I'm trying to go work. Like, I don't want to have this conversation, you know? So,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So let's move into sex trafficking now.
Sure.
And this is definitely glamorized, but it's definitely an issue. I know pre-COVID anyways, every time there was a Super Bowl and people were allowed to attend, that was one of the highest days, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, any big event really is a hot time for sex trafficking, because usually what will happen is traffickers will set up dates for people, or people will even fly into town under the guise of going to a big event, but really they're just there to engage in sex with people illegally. So that's actually very common. We had an operation as a task force earlier last year at a casino, and they were having a very big event pre-COVID. And we were just overloaded with people that day. So very common.
What does that look like in Northeast Ohio? I know we had a Cleveland incident a handful of years ago that was really traumatic and all over the news and different things. And I think that's what most of us see. What does it look like in our region, though?
Yeah, so I have another bonus myth or fact
Uh-oh.
question. Well, not really myth or fact, but multiple choice question. So out of these types of trafficking, I want you guys to tell me which one you think is the most common in Northeast Ohio. So we have survival sex, family controlled, trafficking over the internet, and pimp controlled.
I'm guessing pimp controlled is going to be more bigger cities.
Yeah.
So, but
I think I would say, and maybe I cheated a little bit here to see the definition of survival controlled. I think that may be more often in this area.
Yes, but family is probably a big deal because Northeast Ohio, we have a lot of rural communities. So I'm guessing that has a real strong impact there. So I'm going to go with the two. So I'm going to agree with Nick on one. Survival sex would definitely be one. And then the family one. I know I'm saying the names wrong.
That's okay. No, you guys are doing great. Okay. Final answer, Nick?
I'm going to go with the survival.
Okay. All right. So Mike, again, takes the win on this one. It's actually family control. That's the most common. So that's
three. Nick, I'm killing you.
Yes, he is killing it.
We need to do this for every podcast. It's too much fun. I like winning.
Yeah.
Right. You got to keep a running tally.
I just hope it don't hurt Nick's self-esteem. But we're honored to have you, Nick. And I just work in social services, so I think it's almost like cheating. Yeah. So if we put Nick head to head with a union worker, I think he would win. He would be right up there. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so a lot of people are really surprised to hear that, but family controlled, not just in Northeast Ohio, but all over family controlled is the most common type of sex trafficking, actually. And I can go into that a little bit more if you'd like to.
Now, is that, I guess, explain that to me. Yeah, go into that. Because I'm trying to think, is that like a typical case that you see on the news about someone being molested or going through that kind of trauma? Is that, would that be included in that, or is that something different?
So it does differ a little bit. There's a lot of crossover when it comes to sexual violence of any kind. So within trafficking, there can be child abuse, molestation, domestic violence. But sexual violence, think of it as it's another one of those umbrella terms with a bunch of different categories underneath.
Okay.
And it's kind of like each one of those categories is then a Venn diagram of there's common elements of each one.
Okay,
So
that makes sense.
So what family controlled trafficking usually looks like, it's somewhat self-explanatory in the name. It's just your family are the people that are pimping you out. So generally it's a family business. So maybe grandma started and then pimped out mom, who then pimped out the daughter.
No
and
way.
It makes it really common or really difficult for people to leave that situation, because you may have grown up thinking that was completely normal, and may not even be aware of how much trauma has happened to you through that experience. So that one's really common, actually.
That's not what I thought you were talking about.
Okay.
I thought it was going to be more about like just abuse within the home kind of thing. I never even. Oh man.
So
yeah.
do we
And the
find
trouble.
then?
Go
Do
ahead,
we
Nick.
find that those individuals in that family-controlled environment, are they still have freedom themselves to be outside and they're going to work on a daily basis, but then this is kind of a side thing that's happening? Or is it more really a lockdown control of they're just kind of stuck in their house and it's a harder out for them?
Yeah, I would say typically, and every situation's different, but typically these people are going to school, they're going to work, they're living somewhat normal lives.
Wow.
Generally, this is really tied to drug use. So family members might be selling other family members to feed a substance abuse issue. So that's definitely a red flag. If there's like alcohol or substance abuse concerns within a family, it could be an indicator that something else could be happening there as well. So
really this is another piece for employers. When we think about sex trafficking, again, once my mind goes to, hey, it's this underground world, but really those people could be your coworkers or your employees in your workplace, and these are red flags that we should be looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say, like, this is happening in your backyard. It's happening at your workplace. It's happening at your school. There's a very good chance that there's people you interact with on a daily basis that are being exploited that you have no idea about.
So terrible. I remember, because you mentioned drugs, so I want to hit this a little bit. I remember seeing a headline on Facebook, a story about a trafficking ring that got busted by, I think, multiple agencies. It was an interstate traffic ring, and I can't remember, but there was teachers involved. I mean, it was disgusting. The people that you think, just like family members, people that you think you could trust. So the trauma is even worse because it's someone that you loved and you thought cared about you that takes you through that. But in this story, in the article, the police, and I can't even remember where it was at or anything. It's been at least 4 or 5 years, I'm guessing. But I remember one of the gentlemen broke down to police, and they had him in they're interrogating him about what's going on. And he asked him, "You seem like a nice guy. How did you get involved in all this?" I want to say he was a truck driver. It could be wrong. But somehow he got involved with drug trafficking. And he was in debt to the drug dealer, and his life was in line because I think he was driving trucks and hauling, and then he was taking some for himself. And they finally caught up to him, and I think he had to pay back or his life was on the line, if I remember the article. And he said they were trafficking young children, which is obviously worse than normal. You know what I mean? Terrible. But he said there was a market for trafficking victims, that he would take them and deliver them to the drug dealers to pay off his drug debt.
Yeah.
Now, I don't really know. I haven't seen much other than that one article about that.
Mhm.
Is that true? Does that happen? Is there a market for like kids and different things out there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a market for anything you can imagine. So there's definitely a huge child sex trafficking it's almost like a whole different world, but it's very, very big here as well as globally. But yeah, I would say going back to drugs, there's a lot of crossover between human trafficking and drugs in a number of different ways. But that's not the first time I've heard of someone getting involved in sex trafficking and starting out as a drug smuggler.
Wow. And if I remember
Right.
correctly, he said he could get $4,000 for a kid. It's like
Oh
a
yeah.
toddler type. And some of these kids were toddlers,
Yeah.
into the 3, 4, 5 years old. And it's unbelievable. And this guy was he hated his life, but he felt like he had no other choice. I'm not justifying that for sure, but
Yeah,
it
yeah,
gets so
absolutely.
entrenched there.
And it comes down to money a lot of the time. And I recognize also that a lot of the traffickers have been through trauma and maybe they grew up thinking that this is okay, or that they have to traffic people in order to survive. And that doesn't discount, or it doesn't justify anything that they're doing, but it does put things into perspective. There's a lot of trauma here. There's a lot of addiction. There's a lot of greed and money going on. So yeah.
Oh, it's terrible. I don't know. I'm speechless. Nick, do you have anything on it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's eye-opening, and once again, I think these are just pieces that our employers need to be aware of. And this is an opportunity for, when you say, what can I do? It could be as simple as just being aware of what's happening in your business, having
Yep.
those open lines of communication, and being engaged with your employees.
Absolutely. I think that's the best way to prevent trafficking, is being aware and actually just having empathy and caring about what's going on in the lives of your employees beyond the day-to-day 9 to 5. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to have an intimate relationship with your employees, but even just asking about things outside of work, being mindful of any kind of suspicious activity, red flags that might be coming up. If you have someone that maybe isn't showing up for work multiple shifts in a row, taking the time to sit down and ask what's going on in their life. Could be trafficking, could not be trafficking, but that makes a big difference. And even having positive social supports, like having a good employer to go to if something is happening in your life, that's a good preventer for trafficking, because traffickers like to isolate people from anyone positive in their life. So being someone positive for your employees can make a big difference.
Well, and I think that's the direct correlation right there to what we do through safety and health. We've always said that if you want a strong safety culture, a safe workplace, it's more than just writing policies and enforcing those policies. It's really building a good culture, and that culture is being involved. Some of the best companies that I work with that are the safest have the production managers, the safety managers who know employees by a first name and are engaging with them on a daily basis. And you're right, they don't have to be their best friend and go out and have drinks or dinner with them at nighttime, but they know enough that they're able to do those check-ins on a frequent basis and identify things that are out of place.
Absolutely. That's great. I think that's an exact prevention model that we want to see everywhere when it comes to trafficking.
Right. And you got to think, pre-COVID anyways, we spend more time at work than any other time.
Right.
More than our family, we spend more time at work. If you count a normal sleep night. So we're there. We have those relationships, so developing them, make sure they're healthy, so people can feel safe enough to come to us. That's very important. So, Mary Kay, I just want to ask one more thing.
Sure.
We talked about my pastor who went to a conference out in the Phoenix area a handful of years ago and was blown away through a human trafficking breakout session that he attended. And he mentioned during the training, they talked about Romeos and different things going on social media to lure young women mainly, but also boys out through social media into sex trafficking. So what are those signs? Because I know the Safety Council is employer based, but not just for employers, but if I as a parent and I have, my child's only 20 months right now, so I don't have to worry about it yet. Doesn't have a smartphone. He's not on social media. He does buy stuff on Amazon through the Fire Stick accidentally quite often, I'm learning, but but we're not there at that age yet. But for someone out there that has kids in those age, maybe the tween years and different things, and maybe the parents are starting to let them on social media, what are some things to look for to make sure we keep our kids safe, that a Romeo doesn't come along to try to lure them away?
Absolutely. I would first say, yeah, that's very common for a Romeo. We call that finesse pimping is what that is. So posing as like a boyfriend or a girlfriend, some kind of romantic figure. So I would say for parents, be aware of the people that your kids are talking to on social media, not just strangers. I'm talking people that you know, because we see traffickers that are teachers, that are coaches, that are other parents. So be mindful of that. And I don't say any of this to scare you, but I just say be watchful, have open conversations with your kids about the realities of these things. Don't necessarily like break their trust and go scrolling through their phone, but share some of your concerns, share about human trafficking. I would say be watchful about the things your kids might be posting, or the things that you might be posting that are actually revealing more information about your kids than you might be aware of. So, like for example, maybe someone's posting about how Jimmy's gonna fail school if he doesn't get his grades up. Anyone available for tutoring? That's an opportunity for a potential predator or trafficker to jump in and say, oh yeah, I can help Jimmy with math. Let him come over to my house. It might be seemingly innocent. You might have a relationship with this person, but that's a red flag to look out for. If you aren't monitoring that situation, if you're going to be working late and you're leaving Jimmy with that person, that's definitely a red flag to look out for. So, and even just kids posting in their school uniforms, or, doing like a TikTok in front of their house and their house numbers in the back. Those are all things that traffickers could use to target that person, isolate them, and then get them into a life that they don't want to be in.
Yeah, I have friends that refuse to let their young tweens, or coming to that age, you're not getting social media until you're 18 because of that. And I'm like, man, that's smart. And I know it's kind of a weird thing with parenting, because I said a lot of things that when I become a parent, now I'm a little softer. I give in a little bit.
Right.
Do you have any advice for parents like that? I don't want to get too much in personal opinions, but is that a smart move to kind of restrict social media maybe for a little while?
Yeah, so I think that's a conversation that parents should have with their kids, because I think it's important for the kids to understand why maybe these restrictions are being put on them. But even if, a parent is restricting social media because they're worried about these things, it's also important to be aware that these things can happen outside of social media too.
Right.
So social media, it's just a platform. It's just a platform like anything else. So just like you need to be cautious on social media, you need to be cautious in real life. So I think the best thing to do is educate yourself as a parent, have a conversation with your kid, set up rules that make sense for you guys. I mean, like, I love social media. I use it frequently. I think it's a great tool. It can be awesome, but just being aware of like red flags and things that are suspicious, people that might be trying to notice some kind of vulnerability in your life and exploit you for that. Those are just things to be aware of.
Nick, any final thoughts or questions for Mary Kate before we get out of here?
Yeah, I think just the last piece is, are we seeing higher numbers of these work trafficking and more sex trafficking cases now than years before? Or is it just we're more aware because now it's more in our face with the advent of social media and more direct media connection to the population?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think human trafficking is actually one of the oldest businesses in the world. It's been around since pretty much the dawn of time. But I would say that human trafficking in the past like 10, 15 years has really started to be a buzzword for a lot of people. We're starting to see laws coming out specific to trafficking. There's more victim service providers that are doing things specific to trafficking. And social media, you're absolutely right. The media and social media are really starting to talk about this as it's like the hot topic of the day. So I would say the numbers aren't increasing. We're just becoming more aware of them. But I will say now with social media and the internet, it's definitely becoming like a more common platform for people to traffic other people. So it's just like, it's a different venue, and it allows for people to be slightly more underground than maybe they have been before.
Great, Kate. Thank you so much. This is amazing. I just love getting the word out about this, and hopefully
Yeah.
we'll get you back on sometime in the future and just keep promoting the awareness of this. I think it's the most important thing, just to think about in our everyday life, to pay attention, see something, say something, do something kind of thing. So
Mhm.
if someone would like to reach out to you guys at the collaboration, how can they get
Yeah.
a hold of you?
Absolutely. So you can contact us with our collaborative email address. It is SCCAHT1@gmail.com. And I can send that info to you too, Mike, so you can post that anywhere that you might hear this podcast. And I also encourage people to use the human trafficking law enforcement line for Summit County if you see something suspicious. That number, it's 24/7, staffed by law enforcement. It's 330-252-2614. So absolutely utilize that as well.
So if you're watching this right now, unfortunately, YouTube does not allow to put links, I believe, in the show notes. So you could just Google the Summit County collaboration. But if you're listening to this on podcast, there'll be a link in the show notes to their website and Facebook page. So we'll put that out there so you could contact them. Maybe you'd like to invite them to come do training at your place, or well, actually now would be through Zoom probably, right? So because I forgot we're still in a pandemic.
Yeah.
So you can come out and get trained. So thank you so much, Nick. It was good seeing you out there again and in Zoom land. And to everybody listening, thank you very much. Pay attention to what's going on in your home, in your neighborhood, at your workplace, and let's help put an end to human trafficking. So thanks again, everyone. Everyone out there, be safe.
Have a great one.